I do not intend to be very long, essentially, but to highlight the reasons as to why, of course, we've had the Companies Bill in place, and then, of course, now the Companies Act, which comes into effect from 1 January of next year. It also comes into effect at the same time as the new Income Tax Act will come into effect also. So you have two major pieces of legislation that will come into effect from next year, January. And there is a reason, of course, behind it, and the idea, of course, is to ensure that the application of these modern laws come into effect together, because they, of course, do feed off each other. More specifically regarding the Companies Act itself, as you know that we had a number of consultations for about 3 years with the law firm of Minter Ellison heading the actual review of the existing or the previous Companies Act. As you know, the Companies Act, the previous one, came into effect back in the 70s. And in fact, one may say was languishing in the past when a lot of things around us as a society, as a country, the commercial and financial realities, in fact, had changed quite significantly. Even things like our cross-jurisdictional interaction with countries like Australia and New Zealand, with whom we do a lot of business with. They, of course, had also moved ahead. They had their major rewrites in their laws. So the time was ripe and time was necessary, actually, to bring about the changes in the Companies Act. Rather than doing a amendment to an amendment to an amendment, the whole idea was to repeal the previous act and put in place the new one. We had consultations for about 3 or 4 years through Minter Ellison, and I know some of you over here in this room participated in that particular process. We then, of course, presented the Companies Bill to Parliament. It was the largest piece of legislation, actually, that has been presented to Parliament in modern times. And it was then referred, of course, to the Standing Committee. And again, I know some of you in this room, including the Institute of Accountants, had made submissions to the Standing Committee. The Standing Committee then, of course, made some recommendations to the bill that was presented in the first reading. And those recommendations, many of those recommendations as suggested by the committee were incorporated into the final version of the Act itself. So today we have the Act. Currently the team at the AG's office, together with Minter Ellison and ADB, we're actually drafting the regulations. The regulation is actually very critical to give meat in many places or substance to the various provisions in the Act itself. They are, of course, as we are drafting the regulations, identifying a number of areas, of course, that need to be captured and elucidated a lot more further and in detail in the regulations. And we hope to have the regulations, of course, done in the next couple of weeks, but most definitely it will be in place before 1 January. For example, matters pertaining to capital markets, etc., many of the provisions in the different acts have been repealed, and the regulations need to be able to capture those provisions. We also are trying to, in the process, ensure that the regulations are user-friendly, because as you know that we've been threatening to digitize our company's office for a couple of years now, and we hope to obviously have that completed very soon. So the idea is to have the forms in the regulations to a particular standard, so it becomes easily usable online. So it may not necessarily happen from day one, but we are hoping within the 1 year we will have the ability, you'll have the ability, many of you will be registering companies, making various amendments, and hopefully very soon be able to file your annual returns online. So we need to have the forms up in that particular manner or in that methodology that will be acceptable. We have some challenges with the IT software development at this point in time. We don't think that it's the speed at which the company is working at is very good. So we have some options open. We are looking at the New Zealand system also, and there may be an opportunity to do that. But the whole idea is at the end of the day that all the systems are able to speak to each other. As a matter of interest, as highlighted during the budget week, we have at the moment 2 shifts of people working in the titles office to essentially digitize all the titles in Fiji. Those of you who do deal with the titles office, you would know that if you're going to pick up some titles, the moment you open it up, it starts crumbling. Because this has never been done, and indeed the titles office was never compliant with the law, the older law, which said that all titles need to be kept in a fireproof room. And it never was, and of course the second floor at Superbo House started sinking because of the weight of the paper. And this is why we moved down to the ground floor in Civic Towers. So that work is also at the moment on foot, and you'll see a culmination of all of these respective projects coming together. I think regarding one other point I'd like to make about the Companies Act is as we are drafting the regulations, of course, we can already see how many provisions can be improved, and of course the improvements can come by way of the regulations themselves. But we've been having discussions, in fact the past couple of days with the Minters too about it, and how some of the areas can be improved. So it is very critical to get your feedback on this. And once in particular the law starts, once it gets implemented, because there will be some practicalities. And as you know that, in particular in the area of company law, all jurisdictions tend to almost, one may argue, immediately have amendments done to them to ensure that some of the practicalities are captured. So I think it is very, very important to have the right attitude when we are dealing with the new Act. The Act is obviously, will come into effect from 1 Jan. We need to work together with all the stakeholders. You need to be able to work with us through your institute to be able to make those comments. And then, of course, we can then take it on board, and we're quite open-minded about it to ensure that it does work well. Because the overall rationale behind modernizing these laws is, of course, not for the sake of modernizing them, but to ensure that it does capture, as I said, contemporary changes in society, and also to ensure that the ease of doing business becomes a lot more easier, so we're able to then register companies a lot more easily. We have share buybacks. These are sort of practices that are practiced in other countries but not in Fiji, and of course we need that in order to be able to make our economy a lot more user-friendly, to make it a lot more attractive to foreign investors. Many foreign investors would probably be partnering up with your companies or with your clients' companies. So these laws are very critical to ensure that they are in place. As I mentioned, I'd like to take this opportunity to also mention about the Income Tax Act. And that is to say that, again, you've had the Income Tax Act in place for years, in fact decades, and there's been amendments to amendments to amendments. One of the reasons why we're also very keen to ensure that the Income Tax Act came into force quickly, but also was to also ensure that we have the right culture within FIRCA itself. As I mentioned to a group of people a few weeks ago, that I was reading up in some of the jurisdictions, when investors actually go to countries like USA, the first office they visit is the equivalent of FIRCA. In our case, it's the last office you have to visit. In our case, that's probably the office that's probably being demonized by, whether it's accounting firms or law firms, etc. But I think we need to take a new approach to that, and we really seek your collaboration in that. Of course, there needs to be a cultural change within FIRCA, and that significantly needs to take place in the next 1 year or so. But also at the same time, we ask you to also be able to have that, I suppose, for want of a better word, a conciliatory approach in how you deal with FIRCA. Because if both sides are actually able to have that particular level of respect and be able to deal with each other in a sort of cohesive manner, in an approach where we are looking at improving systems, then we'll be able to get to places. The idea is, of course, everybody has to pay taxes, but to make it as less painful as possible. The rate of tax, of course, in Fiji is significantly low, but the actual process is what most people complain about. And of course, the level of subjectivity that has existed in terms of the interpretation of the law. So with the Professor Burns, who came from the University of Sydney, the whole idea was to get his expertise to remove as much subjectivity as possible and get objectivity within the law. And wherever there is room for interpretation, as we've suggested to FERCA now, to let's have some practice notes or practice guidance that can be published on their website, so you're also aware as to how they deal with particular matters, as opposed to, depending on who's dealing with the matter on the day. So these are the kind of changes, and this is the cultural change we want to bring about, both regarding the Companies Act, implementation of the Companies Act, and of course the Income Tax Act. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to go into the details. I've had my notes here that I spoke about in Parliament, but I don't want to bore you with that, because you have a panel of people who will be talking to you in some of the specific areas. I see the topics that have been selected have been quite specific, and of course they are probably areas of interest. But from an overall policy perspective, I think the message that I'd like to give to you today is to essentially say that we put in place these new laws. It is good for the country. It is good for business. It also makes business registration, etc., a lot more acceptable, a lot more easier. There are a number of kinks that we need to sort out, but there are also a number of processes that are on foot at the moment. When they all culminate and come together in the next year or so, you'll find that things in your life will become a lot more easier. And of course, it will also, for us, what is very critical is a lot more transparency in the whole registration process, in the annual returns process. The level of information is required, is available in the public domain, and of course, at the same time, you are able to continue with business. Banks, for example, a very critical component in the whole business environment. We want them to be able to process your loan applications, be able to do your KYCs, etc. Very quickly and rapidly, and be able to do that online in the same way you need to be able to do your registration online. So there's a lot of positive things that are out in the public space. Some, of course, have to be completed, and others have already been completed. We look forward to your cooperation. We look forward to your constructive criticism, your constructive input, for us to be able to work as a team, to be able to improve the laws and modernize not just our laws, but of course modernize our country. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good night.
Thank you very much.